Thanks to Raymond for corralling us and facilitating the panel, and also to Dominic and Andrea and everyone who does the work at the center to facilitate these really fascinating and generative conversations. My current research engages the quotidian and atmospheric dimensions of Germany's energy transition and the repercussions for politics and citizenship. So many people maintain that the move to renewable energy in Germany will lead to more autonomous and democratically controlled energy production. And indeed, industry figures on the implementation of renewable energy technology are remarkable. In 2013, for example, half of Germany's renewable energy projects were citizen-owned, and roughly 20 million people, or a quarter of the population, live in so-called 100% renewable energy zones. But my long-term research at sites of renewable energy development in coastal northern Germany, which is the heart of the energy transition where a lot of these projects first took place with the implementation of feed-in tariffs for wind energy in the mid-90s. This research suggests that citizen ownership does not necessarily amount to equitable ownership. And additionally, policy briefs and industry white papers fail to account for those citizens who don't take part in the energy transition and why they remain on the sidelines. So what I'd like to do today is share some of my observations from the field in order to move the question of how scholars in the human sciences might better apprehend forms of civic life that flourish where opportunities for conventional citizen participation are limited. So I offer a non-representational perspective on the transition in two senses. First, the data that I relate aren't well represented in conventional accounts of the energy transition that we see in the media or policy papers. And second, I also draw upon this body of literature known as non-representational theory or methodology, which is closely related to STS and the affective turn in the human sciences, to consider the possibilities for making sense of public life that doesn't square with these conventional expectations as to how people will take part in energy transitions. And time doesn't permit me to go into much detail in the literature, but this is an array of methodologies that seeks to flesh out the background of everyday life through the sensory experience of place and of things taking place. Practitioners of non-representational approaches suspend the will to find the ultimate chain of causes in situations and write through scenes, following the adventures of their own perception or cognition across a series of arm-rushing images as presentations through which the world continually throws itself together. And as an anthropologist, this just looks an awful lot like ethnography to me, but the difference in my estimation of this is that you track your perception not with an eye to your biographical. It's reflexive in that you're using your own perception as a way of opening up new categories of understanding, but your reflections don't take the form of the biographical self. They take the form of a radical openness that you then have to suspend. So you move from a sort of Deleuzian openness to the eminent plane of the world in your writing, and then have to hit the pause button, move into more Levinasian, as Medrosa said, a frame of talking about things in order to consider the repercussions for politics. So the title of my talk today refers to a shuttered plant nursery in one such renewable energy zone. Like many of the region's barns that are now covered in photovoltaic arrays, the nursery's 9 growing houses, called Glasshouses, or glasshouses since they're made of glass, have ample roof space for solar panel installation, and yet the nursery's owners, I'm calling Volker and Regina Janssen, have yet to invest in solar panels. Volker is a foreman at a nearby harbor authority, which is commonly known as a well-paying job. And Regina used to work as a kindergarten assistant. When they married in 2002 and lived in a house that adjoins the nursery, and incidentally, they celebrated their wedding in the old nursery itself on one side of its tractor barn with red paper hearts and streamers suspended above its concrete floors. And the growing houses had been completely trashed by their previous owner, who took over the place when the head gardener died, then grew pot in the glass houses and went to jail and filed for bankruptcy. They bought the complex in the hopes of using it for a fledgling reed cutting business, which he would carry out on the side during his winter vacation. But after a feud with Volker's brother, the business collapsed, and Volker's left to work on the nursery every afternoon when he gets home from the harbor, slowly converting the structure into something else and something yet to be determined. The glass houses are a source of wonderment, and in some cases irritation among the neighbors, who can't grasp why the Janssens wouldn't want to monetize this useless old structure with solar panels. And I include the story of the plant nursery here, and I'll return to it again, because its stubborn presence in the middle of a burgeoning renewable energy landscape interrupts conventional narratives of the energy transition and its promises and their desirability. So Germany's energy transition is aimed to mitigate climate change, but it's fundamentally a social project. Or to quote Beth Bognelli's definition of a social project, a process of fixing and co-substantiating phenomena, aggregating and assembling disparate elements of social life into a common purpose. Energy sustainability is a common purpose that connects the majority of pro-renewable initiatives in Germany. More specifically, however, this energy sustainability will be made possible through existing and increasing economies of scale, with local actors enlisted as partners with national and international energy concerns in wind, solar, and now biofuel production schemes. And advocates of renewable energy in Germany and elsewhere have hailed such measures as a means of transforming energy consumers into energy citizens as more people become involved in harvesting energy through small-scale development projects. In the words of the late Hermann Scher, who spearheaded pro-renewable legislation in the SDP in the 1990s, renewable resources will bring a new era of wealth-creating economic development, initiated not by bureaucratic fiat, but by the free choices of individuals. And so the transition is a social project framed in a particular idiom of political participation and economic profit, as well as environmental preservation. In light of this, it's useful to consider how people at sites of renewable energy development are living out this social project, and whether their everyday life squares with this model of energy citizenship that planners have anticipated. And to this end, I've made multiple visits to northern Germany over the years, focusing on several villages in this area, but there's one community in particular, which I call Dopo. It's located about 30 minutes from the North Sea coast. Right there, you can see it. And also I want to point out that my desire to narrate this through the framework of the village is similar to Jim and Kyle's motivation that I'm looking at the making of the village as a socio-environmental form and a techno-pastoral form. It's a composition, it's a space of material participation, particularly in the context of a political project oriented to the remaking of village communities, and village communities as, in Dominic's parlance, sort of energopolitics. So Dobo is located in the county of Aurich in the historical culture area of East Frisia, or Ostfriesland, which is situated between the Weser and Ems rivers. And I first visited this region in the spring of 2000, shortly after a wind park was constructed on the south side of Dobo. A field of 20 wind turbines greeted me as I descended from the Autobahn on that first visit. Today that number is nearly doubled and is still growing, and other wind parks are crowd the horizon. 15 years ago, waste from livestock was used primarily for fertilizer, and today there are 3 plants around the village where such waste from there and elsewhere are processed into biofuel, even as various levels of European bureaucratic authority try to manage nitrate damage to the soils. Biofuel development has also fueled what many bemoan as the cornification of the countryside, as former crops such as rapeseed and pastures for milk cows are being converted into a veritable monoculture of corn for biofuel production. Between my penultimate visit to the village in 2007 and then my fieldwork stay, solar energy incentives spurred many people to install solar panels on top of their homes, and now every 3 or 4 homes has solar panels installed. The village is now over 100% renewable in the sense that its wind park and solar panels produce more energy than the community consumes, although the majority of its cars and heating systems still run on fossil fuels. So what I found remarkable during my time in northern Germany is that citizen involvement is, however, unevenly distributed. Shares of ownership and projects such as wind farms and biofuel processing are concentrated in the hands of only a few large landowners who have driven the rapid cornification of the countryside. And aside from a few villagers who work as technicians or administrators for a nearby wind energy company, villagers' more formal participation in renewable energy development is confined to those who possess property, whether that property be capital to invest in a wind turbine at the civic wind park that isn't owned by the municipality, or fields to plant with biofuel corn, or even a single-family rooftop solar panel installation. And it goes without saying that the majority of local planning decisions are made by male heads of landed households. It's also worth noting that citizens' differing modes of investment index recombinant class formations that are inscribed on the terrain itself. And so you have, also similar to Jim and Kyle's talk, this movement of the population across areas that were developed and reclaimed at different points in time and thus aggregated into the municipality at different times with different effects. Landowning farmers have the most mobility with investments and returns, and they have more capital to pay into wind energy co-ops or small industrial-sized solar arrays. And many of the farmers on the outskirts of the farm claim shares in the biofuel processing plant even when they haven't invested in it themselves, because that gives them purchase on the social scene where more deals are negotiated. home-owning villagers with those who own homes can afford to invest in solar panels. And so, as I touched on earlier, one could say that some villagers are able to become energy citizens as conventional forms of public participation are concerned. So energy citizenship is contingent on property ownership as it is on the will to preserve the environment or even the desire to reap a profit. And this will hardly surprise those of us here today, as energy development has always been a site of social exclusion as well as technological innovation. But in light of existing literature on Germany's energy transition, it's a striking fact, particularly because coverage of the transition's vicissitudes have focused primarily on energy poverty due to price gouging in urban areas, rather than patterns of unequal participation at sites of renewable energy development. And the case of the Glasshouses is an interesting one because the Janssens do, at least in the estimation of those around them, have enough money to convert the Glasshouses into a solar array if they wish to. Volker has worked with the Harbor Authority for enough years that he's become verbeamtet, which essentially means that he's a tenured civil servant. He married later in life and has owned multiple rent houses. And the fact that he would rather work slowly on the Glasshouses, converting them into a series of workshops for his own diverse and not profitable projects, is mind-boggling to neighbors, precisely because it seems he could easily invest in solar panels. And Volker and Regina mentioned the possibility of photovoltaic installation to me in 2010 when many of their neighbors were rushing out to get these solar panels installed. And they even had a representative from a solar power company out to give them the estimate for the conversion, but ultimately they told me it was too expensive because they'd have to pay someone to haul all of the superfluous materials away from the old plant nursery. And indeed, the Glasshouses are full of superfluous materials, although it's not necessarily evident when you first approach the structure. You approach the village from the highway of the nursery, hangs in the foreground like a promise of all that's green and good and grown in Germany, particularly given the fact that it was constructed in the sunrise of the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle, mid-20th century, on land reclaimed after the Second World War, an area that people speak of as a testament to the redemptive powers of technology. If you drive up, you can't get in. The gates are secured with rusted chains. The only way into the property is through the driveway beside the red brick house. And walking through the space itself reveals each of the Glasshouses to be its own microclimate of various flora and other materials. The glasshouse closest to the Janssens' house, for example, is alternately a workshop, trash depot, storage area, and playground. On one side, Volker's tools are arranged according to an unknown order. On the other, bicycles and an above-ground children's pool sit. Behind the structure, 8 more, each collapsing into its own form of apparent ruin, with chunks of glass and fiberglass missing from the ceiling and walls, and the old cement growing tables covered in dirt and weeds, with irrigation hoses dangling from above. Snaking down and around the old growing trays on the tables and floor. If you kept going all the way to the tractor garage, you'd find a stockpile of tools and trash, piles of broken glass and old plastic growing trays awaiting new uses, coils of rope and industrial chains with hand-sized links. And if you were to walk through the structure with the Janssens' elementary school-aged daughter, she would warn you to beware of the glass and the rust. Few of the neighbors had entered the nursery since it was closed for business 15 years ago, so they can only speculate as to what lies beyond the children's pool in the front building, and their speculation takes the form of the Tom Waits song, "What's He Building in There?" A lot of rumor and excitement. Their imagination of these ruins leads them to pathologize Volker's seemingly ceaseless labors on the property. Some are concerned that he must be avoiding his wife. Others joke about the fact that their younger daughter has no sensible place to play, left to swim in the junk heap. Virtually every anthropologist encounters village gossip in whatever village they might study, whether it's a hamlet in northern Germany or a web-based community of software coders. In the case of the Dobbeners and the Glasshouses, I found the situation opened up a fresh perspective on the transition and how people imagine themselves in relation to it and the possibilities within it. Many of those who commented on Volker and Regina's situation had not yet invested in renewable technology themselves, or could only afford incremental solar panel installations on their own homes, and projecting their assumptions onto their neighbors, they laid out a program for proper citizenship among those who could conceivably take part in the transition. And more fundamentally, they traced out infrastructures for making sense of the renewable energy transition. And the renewable energy initiatives taking shape around them, and in so doing, they generated an understanding of how people could take part in the transition and who was in a position to take advantage of such opportunities. And this often at the expense of talking about, say, planning meetings that were mentioned in the newspaper that everyone could come to, buried when the lead was often buried. These things never came up. What came up was projections as to how other people could spend their money. And I found these statements illuminating not only because they revealed villager states of mind, but also because they generated the terms through which people in the community spoke about the transition as a social project. And This was in no way confined to these glasshouses. Other people with land and money, or the perceived capital, were subject of debates and discussion. And following this situation, both the onlookers' comments and Volker and Regina's use of the space, I was reminded of the work of Lauren Berlant, who has argued that the ordinary furnishes a resource for action and a ground for doing politics, and where citizenship is simultaneously a juridical construct in a space of ordinary activity that people occupy without thinking much about it. Additionally, the widespread apathy that many villagers expressed regarding renewable energy development and their own role in it recalls Gibson Graham's work on the Latrobe Valley in Pennsylvania, where hegemonic understandings of the region as driven by coal mining persist, even as the majority of the valley's inhabitants are sidelined from the industry itself. Gibson Graham noted that such cases compel closer attention to forms of civic life that flourish, where access to conventional participation and profit is limited. Yet the task of mapping such forms of life, or in Berlant's parlance, ordinary kinds of citizenship, is a challenging one, in part because it requires the researcher to account for experience beyond conventional representations of experience, and to consider how to make one relatable to the other, what we would commonly know as presentations and representations, which are presentations of a different order. To paraphrase Kim Fortune, such circumstances require an approach that is both traditionally ethnographic yet inflected with creative intent. In closing then, I'd like to suggest that understanding of participation in the energy transition could be greatly expanded through a focus on failed sites of energy development, not only because of the things that people say about them, because these sites offer a ground of thinking citizenship beyond those narratives implicit in planning and technological design. Whether through Volker's labors in his workshop or his daughter's careful cultivation of her own small garden plot in a corner of the facility, which you see on the screen, the Johnson's occupation of the glasshouses trace out alternate forms of investment and value in a region whose representational economy is increasingly driven by the capital promise of renewable energy. And indeed, the conventional forms of political enfranchisement and participation are all oriented to renewable energy, but again, only in terms that property owners can really participate in. The slow conversion of the glasshouses to something else, Sisyphean in its own scale, was its own kind of social project, albeit one that made no sense to those who lived down the street. In such spaces, whether it's these glasshouses or hoarder homes, spaces of abundance amidst politics of scarcity, such spaces compel us to consider how rhythms of everyday life in particular places give rise to worlds, to draw upon this experience and fashion new understandings of citizenship, progress, and investment. And so, spending time in the glasshouses and hearing the pop of the materials and expanding and contracting in the weather, and watching Volker with his tools and converting the roof, creating an above-ground pool for his daughter to swim in. And then what would happen if we were to extrapolate these sort of impressions and the way people talk about them and the way that they commit to inhabiting them, looking at them across multiple sites, particularly amongst those who decide not to invest. What kinds of world-making refrains we hear here, and what are the repercussions of these for politics? What are the idioms that we could form and continually refashion in response to such provocations? Thank you very much.